All right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for sticking around, hanging out at the Warrensburg Area Amateur Radio Club Incorporated meeting this morning. My name is Jason Snyder, and I am Whiskey Victor 3 Victor. Hopefully, going to present on Parks on the Air and give a little bit of information on Summits on the Air. I think I have this kind of figured out, so we'll go ahead and get started. I basically just wanted to share kind of my passion recently with in amateur radio and in light of the whole COVID years that just passed, taking and renewing an interest in amateur radio. So I kind of titled it "Little Power, Big Results," and I figured I would again just share my passion about parks on the air. So hopefully you guys can hear me okay and everything's well. I am recording it, so hopefully we can archive it and potentially throw it up on the channel there as well. So, what is Parks on the Air? I'm sure most of you have probably heard about Parks on the Air, commonly referred to as POTA. Basically, POTA is a radio sport or contesting program. I don't know that it initially started out to be that, but that's kind of what it turned into and kind of has morphed into this amateur radio program where it encourages radio amateurs or hams to actually go out into the field and set up portable communications from various locations. Those locations can be state, provinces, and/or nationally managed public lands. So, when we start talking about public lands, we're talking here out in Nevada, it's a Bureau of Land Management. There in Missouri, we're looking at like wildlife refuge, national state parks, conservation areas, and also some of the historical monuments, located across the U.S. And amateurs are encouraged to go out to these areas and set up a portable, more or less field operation and try to make contacts. As far as POTA goes, POTA has a large set of references, and those references are the parks. So, alluding to the name Parks on the Air, and it has some very basic, simple rules. As a ham, you can take and you can join as an activator. That means you're the one that's actually going out into the field to set up your communications, or you can actually be a chaser, and that is hunting from the QTH, your home QTH, or even mobile. And you can actually be both of them. You can be a chaser and an activator. So for me, I like to operate QRP. For those that may not be familiar with QRP, maybe new to amateur radio, you have these signals that are called Q signals, and they were or are basically a way to send information via shorthand, if you will. So as far as QRP goes, QRP, the Q signal was created to mean, shall I reduce power? The opposite of QRP is what's called QRO. So that means, shall I increase power? And typically, when you talk QRP versus QRO, you're talking about limited power versus normal power that a rig would actually offer. It's been adopted by most hams, again, to mean low power operation. Again, that's QRP. And QRP is recognized as 5 watts or less for CW or Morse code, and typically 10 watts PEP, peak envelope power, or less for single sideband. Again, QRO, typically you're running, more than those two stated limits that identifies QRP. QRO can also mean 100 watts, could also mean 1,000 watts. Typically, those that operate QRO usually operate within the limits of the radio. What about 50 watts? Yeah, 50 watts could be considered QRO as well because you're running more power again via QRP. Here, I just happen to have a couple of different QRP rigs that are kind of in my arsenal, my inventory, if you will. The first picture there is the MFJ 9020, and I actually have the 9020, and I also have the 9040, a 20-meter version and also a 40-meter version. It's 5 watts. The yellow device there that has the Morse code key that you can see in the 9-volt battery, that is actually called the Cricket 20. and that comes from Four States QRP, which is actually they're located in the Midwest, and they are a QRP group that produces kits and then sells those kits. That's actually a 1 watt rig, and then I also have a balanced line tuner there. The next picture next to it is that's actually an 80-meter QRP rig that I built out of a very simple schematic, very limited parts, 1 or 2 transistors. Actually, I think that one has 1 transistor, and it's about a half a watt to 1 watt when the power actually gets to the antenna. Next to that is a newest rig, newest edition, and that's called the True SDX. That is a classic HF rig, if you will. That's about the size of a deck of cards, and that produces 5 watts or up to 5 watts of power on the 5 amateur radio bands, so 80 through 10 meters. Nice little compact. You can do single sideband. You can also do CW with with that device. So pretty handy, and technology is making it very easier to have smaller rigs to get out and to operate. The next one is a 20-meter Rockmite. I actually got this from Schlumen Auction, believe it or not. This is about a quarter of a watt rig, and this could be taken out on a POTA activation and or a SOTA activation, more along the lines of SOTA. But I'll talk about that here in a minute. So how do I take and get started into POTA and or SOTA? Well, the easiest way is you actually go online and you can type into any browser, type in POTA or SOTA. And that will typically take you to a couple of different websites. The very first one, usually when you search it, is Parks on the Air. You would have to create a free account. Free account just means you're going to take and you're going to sign up. You're going to give, the organization your call sign and your name, and they keep no information, no passwords, other than you being able to log into their site to use all of the features that it has. It's all run by volunteers. It's all run by hams, and hams maintain it. And it is the easiest way to get started on Parks on Air. Summits on the Air is the exact same thing, but there's a little twist to it. Summits on the Air actually started over in the UK. So it didn't start here in the United States, started overseas, and it has grown internationally, based on summits or mountain peaks within different regions all across the world. And SOTA is interesting. There is a lot of DX activity on SOTA. POTA seems to be more concentrated in the United States because of the references or the parks are in the United States. It is starting to get internationally known, and other countries are adopting certain parks or national monuments, conservation areas within the world, and we are now starting to see a little bit of an increase or a pickup in other countries having parks on the air. So, how do you take and how do you activate a POTA site? Well, once you create your free account, you would take and then go to the POTA app. You can do it on a smartphone, on a tablet, and or on a computer. Typically, I do it from the house. If I know that I'm going to go out and activate, I will take and I will try to do a lot of the legwork ahead of time, so that way it's easier once I get out into the field. So once you take and create your login and you go to the website, you're going to take and log in, and the simple rules for POTA are you have to make at least 10 QSOs in the same UTC day within the park boundaries. So I know that I literally have a Parks on the Air park just down the road from me. It's about 3 minutes from my house, which is kind of nice. And if I know that I'm going to go down there, I would take and I would log into the POTA app, the application, and I would take and I would schedule an activation to let those that chase those park references know ahead of time that I'm going to be down there. Now, could you activate it if you just drove to the park? Could you activate it then? Yes, you could. If you have cell service, that's the kind of key, is you have to have some type of service in order to take and let others know that you're there. Just by getting onto the radio and calling Parks on the Air does make it a little bit difficult. Not impossible, but a little bit difficult. It does take a little bit of time, and especially if you're using QRP, it's even harder. So those that work QRO and work POTA can go out and go to a park and activate it right at that time. However, my recommendation is always to try to schedule it if you can to let the chasers know that you're going to be at that location. For me, I like to use HF. You can use any simplex mode. So you can use 2 meters, 70 centimeters, and so on. And you can also do POTA via the satellites. No terrestrial repeaters are allowed. So you can't take and make contacts through a repeater and consider that a POTA, a POTA contact. Now, could you get on the repeater and say, "Hey guys, I'm going to go out to such and such location about 1 o'clock. Try to listen for me on HF." Yeah, that's totally permissible. And sending out a notification or a QST, if you will. And again, there's that Q signal. QST meaning information or passing a message out to other amateur radio operators. So here I took and I included a map of Southern Nevada, and I apologize because I'm sure it's probably a little bit hard to see, but this is zoomed out from the POTA website. And what I tried to provide is just some of the local references or the parks. So there are tiny little yellow dots, and again, I apologize if you can't see that, but the yellow dots represent those parks on the air sites. Believe it or not, we actually have one right in the center of Las Vegas, and that is called the Old Las Vegas Mormon Fort. It is a state park. I did operate from that park. It was extremely difficult only because of all of the noise, the RF noise that was generated from the city. Made it very difficult and problematic for me. But I did make my 10 contacts, and actually, I think I made a couple of more than 10, but it was fun nonetheless. There are other various parks. Typically, they are BLM, again, Bureau of Land Management areas, and they surround the valley. Now, if we take and we start looking at the number of parks here in Southern Nevada, they are spread out quite a ways. Still within driving distance, within an hour, possibly 2 hours, and then, the rest of the state. And I'll talk about how many Missouri has versus Nevada. But this just gives you an idea that, within about an hour's time frame, I can typically get to a park and set up and then try to activate it. Some of the parks do require a fee out here. I know when I was back there in Missouri and I went to do several of the parks and the conservation areas, it was nice. You just drive in, you set up, and you start operating. So that is kind of the difference between Nevada and Missouri. So here I took and I zoomed out, kind of relatively keeping Warrensburg in the center of the screen there, and again trying to showcase some of the local references and or the parks that are in Missouri. Just within this screenshot, there's definitely more than we have out here in Nevada. One of the closest ones is Knob Noster State Park. Great park, it encompasses a lot of area. Unfortunately, when I was there, I didn't activate that park, but I did take and I went to the JN Turkey Kern Memorial Wildlife Area. I also went to Ralph and Martha Perry Memorial Site and activated that one. I went to, what was a couple other ones? I went to Blind Pony State Park, I think it is, the lake that's there. I took and I tried to set up a way for me to leave from the Hamfest on Sunday going to the airport, and I had parks all along the way that I could stop and activate. Little bit challenging, especially QRP. Again, I was taking and using one of my QRP rigs, and it did take me about 2 hours, or maybe just slightly over 2 hours, to activate each park. So that was a little challenging, but that was part of the fun. So this is versus the map. This is actually the reference list for the state of Nevada. We actually have 99 referenced parks. Um, that is quite a bit, as far as locations that you can go to. But again, it is spread out through the entire state of Nevada. I don't travel to northern Nevada very, very often. I was there for a conference, and actually, I was in South Lake Tahoe. Because I was in South Lake Tahoe, there was actually a park that was literally across the street from where I was staying. And that was kind of nice. And I went over and activated that park. Again, it took me the better part, probably of a little over 2 hours, 2.5, almost 3 hours to activate it because I was QRP or using nothing more than actually I think it was 4 watts for that activation. So here is the reference list for Missouri. In contrast, Missouri, the state of Missouri, has 330 identified parks that are areas that amateur radio operators can go out and take and they can try to activate. Um, a stark contrast, almost 200 and 229 more parks than Nevada, and that's the nice thing. So for me, traveling coming back to Missouri, it was really a lot of fun because there were parks for days, and I wanted to try to activate them all, and I knew that wasn't reasonable, so I kind of had to set my sights on what was close. I did stay at Whiteman Air Force Base, and from there, believe it or not, just south of Whiteman, there was a park that was about 30 minutes away. Right outside the gates, though, I had, Knob Noster State Park, and I didn't even activate that one. My focus is actually to try to find parks that have limited activations. So typically anything that's under 10 activations or less, that means that 10 hams, only 10 hams have, gone out to activate it. So when you create your free account and you log onto the POTA app and you look at the various parks, you can take and you can find how many times that they've been activated and also how many times that they have been successful. So, looking at that, I typically try to go to ones that maybe have 10 activations or less. You'll find like Knob Noster, I think, had, I don't remember the exact number, but it was, I think, in the hundreds of activations. So, it's an easy one. It's right off of the freeway. And, if hams are traveling through, it's very easy to stop in, especially if you have, QRO, you have a mobile HF rig or VHF rig with 25 watts or 50 watts or even 100 watts, and you're operating from your car, you can make an activation very quick because again, it's activating having 10 QSOs or 10 contacts within the park boundaries. So, kind of, how do you activate the park? Again, you're going to log into you're taking and logging into the app. You are going to take and let everybody know that, hey, tomorrow, Sunday, I'm going to take and I'm going to be at a park, let's just say, and I'm going to be there from a certain time to a certain time. Once you take and you go to the park, you make your 10 or more QSOs. Typically, I use paper logs, so I write everything down on paper and pencil, and then I take and I bring that information back and I upload it into a program that allows me to get the locations of the other hams and to kind of see what propagation looks like. This is one of the nicer things as far as knowing how well your equipment works and seeing what the day's propagation is. I've been out on a couple activations where the propagation and the solar conditions were very, very, very limited. It was a bad time to go out. I should not probably have gone out. However, I did make the activations. So you can't always count on, what the predictions say. I know there's, a couple people there in the room that would probably agree to that. You can take and get on the radio and, it's supposed to be really bad band conditions, but yet you're still making contacts either in the US and or DX contacts. So that's kind of the nice thing about, a couple of these programs. Once you take and you collect all your data and your information, then you're going to take and you're going to download that information. Now, I use QRZ as one of my logging programs. There are a whole host of other programs that you can use, but the requirement for Parks on the Air is that you have to submit what's called an ADIF file. So once you take and you make your contacts, you log them, and I use QRZ, and then I take and I download or export those contacts from QRZ, and then I can take and upload them into the POTA site. Now, you're asking, well, why do you want to do that? As a hunter and as a chaser, you can take and you can earn various awards. And it's kind of like, because it is that radio sport or contesting, sorry, type of program for amateur radio. As a hunter, I can take and I can earn awards for various states as well as different various parks. As an activator, I also get points and can earn awards for taking in for activating various states and or parks. If I keep going back to the same park and activating it over and over and over again, there's an award for that. If I do it at the start of the new UTC day, so or let's say I do it what's considered late shift. Maybe I work all day and then I come home and I try to activate it at 8 o'clock at night. There's an award for doing it later than doing it just during the normal UTC day. So as far as exchange goes, what is needed for an exchange, or how do I call CQ? Well, typically on sideband, on phone. Again, I use HF and I have used VHF before as well. You're just going to typically do it the way that we call CQ. CQ, CQ, parks on the air. This is WV3V. And then I like to give the courtesy of telling those that may be listening or scanning, what park I'm at. Depending on those that are the hunters, they may want that park reference or they may already have it. A lot of times you'll find you have what are called repeat offenders. And those repeat offenders are, hunters that are constantly trying to help out the POTA activators. Not everybody can get out to be an activator, and that's okay because there are plenty of activators and there are plenty of chasers as well. For CW, a little bit different. You're sending in Morse code, but the format is still very much the same. CQ, CQ, POTA. This is WV3V, WV3V, and then I go K. It won't be as detailed as calling on sideband because I try to make more contacts via CW or Morse code. So a lot of times I won't give the park reference unless they ask for it, or if you do what's called a park to park. A lot of times on sideband, you'll hear people say park to park, park to park. And what that means is that you have two activators out in the field set up somewhere within the United States, and one park is trying to contact another park. And that gets you points out also in the POTA program. So kind of interesting, and it's kind of neat, especially when you make park to park contacts. You add those to the log, and it helps you out. When you schedule an activation, the reverse beacon network can pick up your signal and you'll be automatically spotted. So in CW, there are or is this thing called the reverse beacon network. And what it does is it's a bunch of people. They can be shortwave listeners, they can be hams, they can just be regular people that monitor the radio frequency waves. And when they hear a certain call sign, they retransmit that to let others know that, hey, you're out there. This is very big in DXing and those that like to chase, rare DX stations. The reverse beacon network for Morse code picks up those signals, so that way that a rare DX station is actually on the bands. If this wasn't really happening, you wouldn't know that they're out there. So typically, to get spotted by the reverse beacon network, you have to schedule your activation, going out to a park in advance, and you have to use your call sign twice. So CQ, CQ, POTA, WV3V, WV3V, and then here I've had K3331, and then K, meaning I'm opening it up to anybody, anywhere. A lot of times I'll also take and I'll say, QRZ at the end of calling CQ. CQ, CQ parks on the air. This is Whiskey Victor 3 Victor, QRZ, anybody, anywhere. And that's kind of how I do it. You'll find that people get into a rhythm for the parks on the air, but you're controlling, how fast or how slow you go for that activation. Something else to consider in that is propagation. Like I'd already mentioned, if propagation isn't very good, you want to try to make as many contacts as you can. Now, let's say you only make 9 contacts. If you make 9 contacts, then the park technically is not activated and you will not get awarded any kind of points. So that's kind of the difference between 10 QSOs and 9 QSOs when you're activating a park. Okay, so for equipment, everybody always asks, well, what do you take out there? What do you have? Obviously the basics. You got to have a transmitter and or a receiver and or a transceiver. In one of the very first slides, I showed a picture of just a transmitter. So I would have to have some type of receiver. Could I have just a homebrew transmitter and a shortwave radio that aligns to that same frequency? Sure, there's lots of people that do that. And then you have to have the other basics, the antenna, the coax, connectors. I typically take out, tent stakes and guy wires. I have a tuner. You have to have some kind of power source. My very first Summits on the Air activation, I went out and I didn't have a pencil or anything to write with. So that became a little problematic. How am I going to record all the call signs? Well, I did have my phone with me, so I just used the audio recorder on my phone to record all of the QSOs that I was having. So that way I could go back and log it and then submit my log to Summits on the Air or Parks on the Air. If you're going to be out for any length of time or out here like in the desert, it is pretty sparse. You are away from a lot of civilization. I take water, snacks, sunscreen, and a hat. Typically, I'll wear a hat, and you have to have kind of all those provisions. So that's where the pre-planning takes and comes into play, and it just helps you. You can never have enough connectors, and you can never have enough coax. What you think you may have, always double check and triple check it just to make sure that when you get out there you're not able to activate the park. For me, I do have somewhat of like a little travel setup, and I did bring it back to Missouri there. I use the on the picture on the right hand side of the screen. It is called the Mountain Topper. It is a 4-band QRP rig by LNR Precision, and it works off of 12 volts. So I have a little AA battery pack, and then I also have a tuner, which is it's called the MTech ZM2 tuner. And right now, my antenna that I currently use, my go-to antenna, is a ZEP. It's a homemade ZEP that is part ladder line and then part 22 gauge wire. And for me, it just works extremely well. There's a whole host of antennas that you could take and you could use. I also have some extra Morse code keys. I have a straight key. I have a paddle. And I always take out, an extra radio or an extra antenna or lots of extras. When I'm traveling, though, when I came to Missouri, I had everything in a nice, neat little package, and it was about the size of about probably a small loaf of bread, and it worked. It worked great. I did 7 parks with 4 watts in 3 days, so that was kind of my go-to kit. So here is my setup that I kind of use out here, and again, the pictures are kind of mixed match. I tried to throw some variety in there, but when I'm here in Nevada, I typically use the Zygo G90, and that is a HF rig only, 20 watts max power. A lot of times I'll start out on 10 watts, maybe. If I'm doing CW, I'll go anywhere between 5 watts and 10 watts, and then if propagation really isn't in my favor, then I'll go to the full 20 watts to try to make the activation. Again, I do use the tuner, and then I have a portable battery pack for the Zygu. It is a 12 volt, 35 amp hour battery from Bioenno. The battery was slightly expensive, but the return of investment on it is quite well. It gets somewhere around 2,000 to 3,000 charges and discharges. And then the battery will possibly start to degrade, but it's been a trooper so far. I also like to use gear ties, 550 cord and tent stakes. The gear ties you can find typically at like Walmart, Lowe's, Home Depot. I think Harbor Freight also has them, and for this trip back to Missouri, they were actually really a godsend because they really helped out. I didn't have to break out the tent stakes a whole lot, and I didn't have to break out the 550 cord. I just used the gear ties, and for my mast, I used what's called a squid pole. It is actually an extendable fiberglass fishing pole, and once it's fully extended, this one I think is right at either 17 or 19 feet in length. The tip is very, very thin, so I might not extend it to the fullest extension, but I can get it up high enough to where I have an end-fed half-wave antenna, or I can set it up as an inverted V configuration, and I can use it that way. Some of the other antennas that are pretty popular, the Wolf River Coil is a very popular antenna. It is a ground mounted and loaded coil that you can take and adjust. Typically, well, they have various versions. The version that I have is a 40 through 10 meter version. Alpha antennas, soda beams, buddy poles, screwdriver antennas. There's so many different antennas out there. You can really get lost in it. For me, I like the simple wire antennas. Those seem to work best in my applications, but it's not necessarily for everybody. So some other resources. Here are the logging programs. Like I said, I typically use traditional pencil and paper. I have a book that I take with me. There, that kind of top picture is like my setup. Operating from a vehicle if it's hot. A lot of times I'll try to maybe just operate from the cab. Obviously having everything outside, but the radio, there's the tuner, and then my logbook. There's also an app that is an iOS app and an Android app, and it is called Hammers, HAMRS. Here you can actually take and set up your activation logging through this application. So it is kind of nice. Again, it does require the use of cell signal. So if you don't have a cell signal, you won't get the lines plotted like I show in the pictures there. You can log all your contacts, which is kind of nice because you can put in your frequency, you can put in the date, you can put in your call sign, your park reference, and you can also take and put in your operating power, and then it will, save all that stuff. So when you make a contact, it'll keep the time. I try to get accurate information. I try to get the RST as well. When you make the contact, a lot of operators, whether they're chasers or activators, they want to know how well their system's working. So you give an RST report, readability, strength, and tone. If it's sideband, then it's readability and strength. So keeping that accurate, I try to keep it as accurate as I can. I also use another app to take and to identify where I'm actually located. And that one, as far as that application, it's called Ham Clock, and I don't have a picture of it, but apologize for that. But that gives me my grid location. So I could be operating, outside of a different county, and a lot of times what happens is hunters will look for that park in that county. So they're hunting the park. They're also hunting counties. Again, lots of various awards in amateur radio, not just with POTA and SOTA, but you can do like Worked All States and DXCC, and all the various things that go along with ham radio. So that's kind of nice. One of the other ones that I like to use is called Ham Alert. This is an application that I set up on a computer. And what it does is, for me, it alerts me to other amateur radio operators that are on the air. So I actually have set up to where there are certain people I follow in the POTA world and the SOTA world and others. One gentleman is out of Colorado. His call is WG0AT, and that is Steve, and his call sign is the goat. They call him the goat. He has goats. So kind of a funny, call sign there. But when he goes out, he is very, very big into summits on the air. So I will monitor, the airwaves via this application to take and to listen for him. Now, I've also taken and I put my own call sign in there. Why would you do that? For me, if I'm out with QRP and if I use, very limited amount of RF power or QRPP, let's say a quarter of a watt of power, I want to make sure that I know I'm getting out. So what happens is this app, again, by you using the reverse beacon network and those listening, either via shortwave or other amateur radio operators, they're skimming the airwaves to see who's out there. When I know that my antenna and everything is working properly, I'll get an alert on my phone that my signal's getting out and where it's getting out to. So that's kind of nice for me. I like to try to keep track of things to know, am I getting out? Is the antenna working? Is the radio working? Is the tuner working? Do I have everything set up, correctly to make sure that I'm getting out? So just something to kind of keep track on. Ham Alert, again, it's kind of a cool app. It's not necessarily as easy to set up, but once you get into it, you have to kind of play with it a little bit to set what you call a trigger. So, are you going to specifically only look for this call sign on CW? Are you going to look for them on sideband? Are you going to look for them on FT8 digital? So, there's lots of different things that you can set up there. So you're probably sitting there going, okay, why should I do Parks on the Air? Well, for me, again, it was just a renewed interest in amateur radio coming out of COVID, and wanting to get out and to play ham radio again, because I've been a ham radio operator for 37 years. I've done lots of different things in amateur radio, slow scan TV, fast scan TV, working the satellites, working the shuttle, working the mirror. That was kind of a highlight. Doing HF, VHF, fox hunting. You can do all these things. Parks on the Air was just fun. Like for me, it was just literally going out, trying to see if I could make contacts out in the field. Now, some nice things about it. Typically, when you get out and away from, a city environment, you do have a lower noise floor. For us working in the desert, and it's kind of nice. You get out to see nature. There in Missouri, it was the same thing. It was nice to get away and to be operating and to use just some different operating techniques. One of the things is each location has its various challenges. Out here in the desert Southwest, we have very limited trees, if any at all. And so you have to go with a different mindset to set up an antenna. There back in Missouri, there were trees everywhere. So I used a different approach. I actually bought an arborist throw line to throw up into a tree with a weight, and I strung my antennas that way. So that was a first for me. So I got a chance to practice that and to see if it works, if it doesn't work, or does it get all tangled up. And I did have a couple of issues at the very first one, but I worked them out real quick, and then you adapt and you overcome. And so that way, when you go to the next park, it makes it a little easier. Here you can see at the bottom, there's a couple of awards there. That's what they look like. They're just certificates that they send you. It's typically a digital document. Um, and you can work towards those. I really don't keep track of them. I mean, I have a few as I can show there, but I don't. It's not like, for me, it's not going out and trying to get an award. For me, it's just going out and having fun. Here's the best part of being a Parks on the Air activator or Summits on the Air activator. It's that you become the DX. If you have never ever in your ham career worked a pile up where you're the one they're chasing, it is simply gratifying to know that people are chasing you and want to make the contact. It never ceases to amaze me every time I go out. Working CW, it's challenging, and I'm working on my skills every time that I go out. Even digitally, there are lots of activators that go out now and are doing FT8, digitally and activating parks. I had a parks, or I'm sorry, I had a pile up via FT8 from here at the home QTH once. And I was working a pipeline straight into Japan, and it was pretty cool to have all those Japanese stations trying to work me, at the same time. Out in the field, again, you become the DX, and people are chasing you, to make that contact and to have that new park added to their list. So we have Parks on the Air and you have Summits on the Air. Summits on the Air, again, is very similar in nature. Again, it's that radio sport program where you're taking and going out, but now you're taking and going to actual mountaintops or peaks, that have been identified within the states, and actually around the world. And you're going, and it's a little more physical activity. Now, are all peaks, where you have to get out and hike up a mountain? No, there are some peaks and some, summits that you can take and you can drive up to. So could you drive up to, the top of a mountaintop and activate from your car? Sure, you can. So there's, the scheme of it, the contesting part is the same. Summits on Air, obviously, because it's a little more challenging, doesn't necessarily have to have the 10 contacts or the 10 QSOs to activate it. You actually only need one. In order to get points, you have to make at least 4 QSOs for a Summits on the Air. You can climb to the top of a mountain, or a very high hill that's been identified as a summit. Take your VHF radio, a simple Yagi antenna made out of a tape measure, similar to what you'd use for radio direction finding, and I've done that. Summits on the Air is in right now nearly 100 countries around the world, and each country has their own set of designated summits. Each summit then can earn the activators points as well again as chasers. An app that goes with this down in the lower right hand corner is called Soda Goat. And again, it has a picture of a goat there, but that is the application for iOS and Android phones that will alert you, or you can go onto it and actually see what summits are being activated. Again, chasers, those that work from the home QTH, they try to get points by working lots of different summits, maybe from various states or around the world. And then the activators get points for going and actually activating those summits. So, how do you activate the site? Again, pre-planning is always important. You want to take, and if you can, you want to schedule the activation. You're going to go and hike to your summit. Get to your summit. You're going to try to make at least 4 contacts if you can without the use of repeaters, and then you're going to log them. Very similar how Parks on the Air works. Really, they are very similar. It's just a different way to take and to use amateur radio. Again, Summits on the Air is a little more strenuous. It is a little more intensive because of taking and having to be somewhat physically fit to do those. And again, it's not for everybody. It's okay to be a chaser to where you sit from the home QTH and try to make contacts via that. So real quickly, here was one of my activations. This was a local summit that's right here in on the west side of Las Vegas in the Valley. This is called Lone Mountain. The designator you can see there on the screen is Whiskey 7 November, stroke Charlie Kilo 227. This was the first and actually only activation that I've ever done for Summits on the Air. It's not that hard of a peak to climb. It did take me about 30 minutes to get to the top because I am out of shape. But nonetheless, it was challenging. For this activation, I took my VHF UHF handheld, and I had my VHF Yagi, and I strictly stayed on 145, or I'm sorry, 146.52 simplex, and I made, I think, 11 or 12 contacts via simplex alone. Then I took and I turned to HF, and I tried to make some contacts with the Wolf River Coil and HF CW. I did make 2 contacts. So the summit was activated, but it was fun and it was a neat experience. This was in December timeframe, I think. So it was a little bit chilly up on top. That's why I still got the scarf on. It was an elevation gain of about 521 feet. Very cool, very interesting, very fun. I'd like to do more. I'm just not physically active enough, I think, to do them. Maybe once the fall comes and it gets a little bit cooler because it's still too hot weather right now, I may try a couple of other peaks that are close by and see if I can activate them. The pictures in the lower left-hand corner that shows you just a small snippet of all of the summits here in the Las Vegas Valley area. So I know it's probably hard to see, but all of those triangles are a different summit located within that screen capture. And it is kind of crazy. And then I used also another program called All Trails, and that allowed me to take and to climb up to this peak, and it actually showed my route. So Summits on the Air, again, very similar to Parks on the Air, but a little more, a little bit harder to do if you're not quite in shape. Oops, sorry about that. So here you can see this is the oops. Here you can kind of see the which is called Soda Watch 3, and this is, again, this would be the app where you can take and you can go the application. This shows you the various summits that are being activated currently. They're called spots, and I mentioned that earlier. Parks on the Air also has that. When you take and you go into Parks on the Air online, you can take and you can see who is actually activating or who is at a park, and it shows you all of the different modes. So sideband, CW, digital, and you can see where they're located. Here, this is for the summits on the air. This shows you all the people that are active right now and or going to be active, their call sign and location, so you kind of know where they're at. Kind of getting ready to wrap it up here. Safety obviously is a big concern. You kind of have to know your limitations and your gear. Always try to plan ahead before the activation and use the available online resources. I use Google Maps. I have various weather apps on my phone and or the computer. I try to look at propagation tools. Here you can see some very close lightning. This was actually in Las Vegas, New Mexico. It started out where it was extremely clear. That was, or relatively clear. That was the picture on the left. And then we transitioned into a storm that brewed up while I was trying to activate. The crazy part about this was I had everything set up in the antenna. I started making some contacts. I got all the way to almost activating it. That's when the lightning started getting real close. I ended up getting shocked from the aluminum table. I also got shocked from the chair, and I said, "Well, I guess it's time to stop with the activation." The storm kind of came up, and it took a while to pass. When I was in Missouri, the thing I noticed was the ticks. And you guys are familiar with them, and you're probably relatively used to them. However, for me, because I was not used to the humidity, the nice thing was I was sweating a lot, and I would like to wear shorts. The ticks would crawl on my lower leg or my ankle. I would feel something, and immediately I'd look down and I had ticks on me. From all of the different sites that I went to, I ended up with a total of 9 ticks that had gotten on my lower legs at any given point. So each location had them. The whole state has them, I know. We have them out here, but they're very limited, strictly to the higher elevations. But as far as safety goes, you really have to kind of plan ahead and know what you're capable of doing and what you're walking into. So here's just a couple of activation shots. Various parks that I've been to. One of the things for me is I like to get out and I like to be in nature. This was Big Rocks, Nevada. This park had never been activated before, so I was the very first. That kind of is interesting. It gives you a little bit of a sense of accomplishment because you're the first one to activate it. So this was up in Middle Nevada. I also went to New Orleans for a business trip, and I went to the local park there that was the Jazz National Historical Park, right in town in the down in the French Quarter of New Orleans. Unfortunately, I didn't activate it. I got 7 or 8 contacts on 40 meters, and that was it. Then the band closed up. So it was fun. My rig there you can see is on the park bench, and then literally I had an end-fed half-wave antenna going up to the very lowest limb that I could reach on a tree. So it was no more than probably about 6 or 7 feet off the ground in a sloper fashion. Um, the next two pictures are up at Van Sickle By State Park. This was in southern Lake Tahoe. I was right up against a mountain, literally at the base of a ski mountain, and trying to get my signal over the mountain was a bit challenging. That one took me about 3 hours to activate again. It was about 4 watts, 3.5 to 4 watts. The Desert National Wildlife Refuge down in the lower left-hand corner. That's my kind of test ground, if you will, for antennas. I like to go out there because it is wide open desert and I can set up, a portable mast. I use a Spider Beams 12-meter mast, so that's 40 foot in length. I typically use that on, the activations where I'm here. If I'm traveling, I will use the little fishing squid pole that I have because it's very compact. One of the other activations that was new for me and new to a lot of chasers was Beaverhead Rock State Park in Montana. We actually were on summer vacation when we were traveling through. This park was literally right off the highway and it had not been activated, surprisingly. So I went to set up and made quite a few contacts from that park because it was new. And, the chasers wanted that park to add to their reference list. So a little bit of a rambling there. Again, just a couple of more pictures. Hopefully, this was kind of informative and maybe excites you to possibly to get out again. Taking your gear, going out and testing it. Trying to minimize it, trying to take and have portable operations. The easiest kind of way to think about it a lot of times is that you are going out and doing a field day every single time you go out to do a park on the air and or a summits on the air. It's very fun. For me, it's enjoyable to get out and test my equipment and test, to see my abilities and to see what propagation is like. And you just get out and you bring, a renewed interest to these areas that some people have never been to. Blind Pony Lake was actually a really nice lake. If you've never been there, go visit it. It's huge. I was really shocked and surprised because I figured it was going to be this small little, pond, whatnot, or lake, I should say. And it turned out to be this great big, huge, area, and it was great to set up in. That one took me a little bit of time to activate, but it was fun. Katy Trail State Park was another one that was actually kind of a fun park. It's a whole trail system, which I didn't know, but trying to figure out how am I going to set up, here. So when I was traveling, I ended up activating from the back of the car most of the time, and just tried to make it work. So I appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, I think, somehow, and we will. I'll take questions here after I stop the recording if I can figure out how to do that.